Okay, good afternoon, everyone. It's good to have you join us this afternoon for this edition of our Distinguished Personality Lecture Series, where we're hoping to revisit an important part of our history, which is the Nigerian Civil War. We have a very distinguished person join us for this lecture, Professor Francoise Ugochukwu, who has graciously accepted to share some of our research work with us on this very important part of our history. So we're going to be focusing on the story of Regina Ubanatu. I hope I got the pronunciation correctly. And the forgotten victims of the Biafran War, who has a very important story that we can learn from and try to also create the proper narrative for documenting this part of our history. This lecture can come at no better time than when we're trying to, if we can call it, heal from the past experience of the hate that must have gone on during the elections. And so we need to also know what the kind of experience. Some people are calling for certain things, interim government, secession, war, and stuff like that, because a lot of us do not even have an idea of what happened in the past. And so the aim of this lecture is to also bring us into the world of some of these people. And, funny, and we're fortunate to also have a story of somebody who was differently abled and has been able to navigate the challenges of life to make meaning out of our own lives, to also look for people like her, who have their stories to share. I'm not the lecturer, so let me not preempt the lecture, but let me just introduce us to our center, the West African Traditional Justice Center, which is based in Abuja, Nigeria. Is designed to help to mediate the gap between research and practice in the field of transitional justice, social justice, and all other aligned fields. So we bring in practitioners as well as professors to help share their research and see how we can engage with each other to build a community of a productive community where knowledge sharing is something that is paramount. So without much further ado, let me invite the moderator for the lecture, Professor Ugochukwu, who is always available when we call on her to help introduce the lecturer and also moderate the lecture. So thank you everyone for joining us, and we look forward to a very interesting time with this lecture. Thank you.
Thank you, Philip. It is my pleasure to add my voice in welcoming everyone to today's conversation on Regina Ubanatu and the forgotten victims of the Nigerian Biafra War. Our presenter today is Professor Francoise Ugochukwu of the Open University, United Kingdom. I will tell us a little bit about her, not from her CV, but from my own experiences, my lived experiences with her. As an undergraduate in the University of Nigeria, Nsukka, in the late 1980s, I was at the same faculty with Professor Ugochukwu. She was in the Department of Foreign Languages. I was in history. We're actually in two different buildings. But I knew her from a distance. I loved her from a distance, and I admired her greatly, largely because of her simplicity. It never ceased to intrigue me how she so fully adapted to Nigeria and made it her home. What differentiates her from us is just her color. Otherwise, she's every inch an Igbo woman, a proper Nigerian. I was saddened when she left in the early 1990s for Europe. But luck smiled on me in 2002 when we met at the Second Africa Pop Conference in Austin, Texas. I don't know if she still remembers. For me, I have not forgotten that meeting or that conference. She was so sweet to me. She sat and chatted with me. She gave me an attention that none of my teachers had ever given me. I remember the picture we took together. It has since been on my office wall. I found her so available, not just to me, but everyone, especially younger scholars. She always had an encouraging word to say. She was always helpful. I never asked her for books, but she constantly sends me books she thinks will be useful to me in my work, very current books. For us in Nigeria, we often don't know when the latest books are published. I get to know about these books through her. She doesn't do this just for me. She does it too for the department she left more than 30 years ago. What I find especially intriguing is her hard work. I situate her in the company of Kele. For those of us who read the Bible, Kele was one man who refused to retire even well into his mid-80s. Our gathering today is a testimony to her scholarly resilience and hard work. Professor Francoise Ugochukwu is currently affiliated to the Open University in the United Kingdom. She's also a senior research fellow with IFRA Ibadan. And as you would have guessed, she retired as a professor from the University of Nigeria with a specialist in Nollywood, Nigerian, Igbo, and intercultural studies. Her research currently focuses mainly on the reception, cultural and linguistic impact of Nollywood in Europe. Her latest book publications include Nollywood on the Move, Nigeria on Display, that was in 2013. With James Starr, she edited Nigerian Film Culture and the Idea of the Nation, Nollywood and National Narration in 2017. Today, she'll be talking to us about forgotten victims of the Biafran War. Professor Ugochukwu's scholarship consistently manifests an amazing ability to weave together a variety of sources to produce richly nuanced and comprehensive results. We'll get a glimpse of this in this presentation, where literature, arts, films were all used to explore Biafra's forgotten victims. I keep saying that we have not heard all that should be heard on the Nigerian Biafra War. I'm presently working on a manuscript titled Nigeria Biafra War and the Politics of Oblivion, Implications of Revealing the Hidden Narratives Through Transformative Learning. I can immediately see parallels with Professor Ugochukwu's work. I'm looking forward to her unfolding some hidden accounts from what the war has for us, as she tells us about Ubanatu. So I will hand over to her to take up from there and feed us with what she has prepared for us this afternoon. Professor Ugochukwu, please you take the floor.
Thank you very much. Yeah, you know, although I'm working mostly on Nollywood at the moment, because of the need in Europe, there are not many people that are working on that, but I've never left Igbo land, you know, and and my work is really to be a go-between, you know, to make, sorry about that, oh dear, to go between two cultures and like a translator, you know, and that's what my work is really about. And I met Regina Ubanatu. Oops, what happened from Clarence side? Okay, that's it. I met Regina some years back now. Somebody introduced me to her, and it was like being sisters, really. We were so complementary. It was very, very interesting because I was you know, Igbo, and she was just the opposite, you know, born in Igbo land, but completely French. In fact, she's more French than me. And so it was quite interesting. And our story is quite an endearing story, but it's quite sad at the same time. As you know, the Nigerian Civil War ended more than 50 years ago now, but it is still very, very raw on the contemporary Nigerian body politic. And it has been poorly studied for many, many reasons we won't go into now. And, Wanyanwu and Anyasudu said that trauma theorists have focused more on physical experience induced by war, but little attention has been paid to psychological trauma. And this is real. I remember those days we were at Nsukka, especially in the early 70s. I was there from 72. And I remember the mud people on the, Onyala, on the streets that were just roaming around stark naked and talking in their own world. And for me, it was a discovery because I'd never seen. And then later on, I heard even from Achebe's latest book in 2012, where he mentioned that, all the trauma of people from following the war. But this didn't stay only in Igbo land, because I've been seeing people here in the UK that were from Igbo land that went through the war and were really, really damaged. There was one in particular that was on constant medication. Anytime he doesn't take his medication, he just goes berserk. He could not even travel. It was so sad. The story of the Nigerian Civil War and post-war Nigeria would definitely be incomplete without an exploration of that impact on the victims. But the main focus on this paper will be on the hidden young victims who never came back home and are still to be accounted for. And apart from that unusual case of Regina. So the aim is to highlight the need to acknowledge the war's hidden traumas, to reveal the unforeseen long-term consequences on displacement, to report how victims suffered and coped, and to challenge our country, Nigeria, to acknowledge its traumatic past in order to bring about a much-needed national healing for a healthier social and political future. Professor Uchendu, your study Recollections of Childhood Experiences During the War, based on oral corpus collected in 2000-2001 in Anyoma, and February 2005 east of the Niger from informants, mainly aged 42 to 55, made it possible to record their memories. The memories they had from 1967 to 70, where that time they were between 5 and 18 years old. And that survey focused on the eastern Nigeria region, the Igbo land of Biafra, the Igbo part of Biafra that was most affected by the war, and Anyoma, and also the Idoma and Tif communities. And I valued that study of yours. More recently, the Parliament of Corps hosted in Athens in Greece from 30th June to 1st July 17 as part of the so-called Documenta, the first meeting of former Biafran children entitled Biafra's Children, a Survivors Gathering. The event was organized by Olu Ogwibe, one of the young survivors, whose archival meditation on war was deposited at the National Museum in commemoration of the 50th anniversary of the war, with the aim of highlighting the crucial importance of humanitarian efforts. Closer to us in 2020, the South Tomean filmmaker Silas Taini produced a documentary about the Biafran airlift. There is also a book on that. And he said it was called Equatorial Constellations. And the goal of his film was not to narrate a past event, but to display that very past through the present inner look of the ones involved in it at the time, bringing together former child refugees, Sao Tomeans, joint church aid officials, and volunteers. And he said hundreds of children had been evacuated from their land, arrived in this island, Sao Tome, escaping pain, slaughter, and famine. Today, 50 years have passed. That is the time he produced this. Memory remains an open wound. Their names, faces, and lives are forgotten. Their remembrance fade away. Where are these children, and what happened in their memories so far? What can they convey? Their stories are part of the universal memory and remain as living testimonies. Vivian Obonna, that was one of the organizers of the Athens meeting, is also an Abuja-based writer and researcher. And since January 17, she has been having regular meetings with survivors of the Biafran War, men, women, and children, most of whom had no platform to share their childhood experience, So she started documenting this online. I met her once. She came to the UK and we met, and she was chatting about this, saying that she was hoping to get a full database of memories, testimonies, experience, and I give her the website to that. Lastly, I discovered a PhD on the same subject by Joshua Shaw, 21, post-traumatic stress disorder in Biafra war survivors. And that is a very, very interesting piece of work. So this talks about the suffering of Regina Ubanatu and how she managed to go past her wound and start helping others. She was a disabled child at the time. She was evacuated from Okija, age 2, in 1967, and she was taken to a refugee camp in Gabon, in Libreville, one dose open at the time. And I tried to assess the short-term and long-term linguistic, emotional, and social impact which the war and subsequent displacement had on our life. I have a book here. This is the book she published. Do you see it? Yeah?
Yes, we do.
She published that book on her story. But I met her personally. I was introduced to her by somebody else in France. She's living in Paris, and we have been friends. And I'm working with her on the website she created, neverforgetbiafra.org. So in 1970, she left Libreville, and instead of being repatriated to Nigeria, she was transferred to France for further medical treatment. And it took years before she managed to discover her name, her age, and her Nigerian family. That is, it was 1978. So before that, she didn't know her name. She was called Mary, but it was not her real name. She didn't know the time she was born or where. She didn't know anything about her family. She had absolutely no clue. And she was made an official ward of the state in France. So her education and care were paid for by French government. In 2004, she met Bernard Kouchner, that was a French doctor in Biafra and former cabinet minister in France, who encouraged her to share her story. And this is how she published this book. But though she started learning more of English, but she mostly speaks French, she doesn't know Igbo, and so it's difficult. But now she has launched that endowment fund some years back. This is the cover of the book. And this is a real picture of her when she was in Gabon. This is the place in Igbo land where she was born. So she was born in Ihala in 1965. Then secession happened in 1967. She traveled to France in 1970. She managed to meet her family in 1978. Then she became involved in humanitarian missions in Africa in 1995, 1996. Then she created the first association to help disabled women in France in 1996. Then 2003, she took part in the creation of the French Equal Opportunity and Anti-Discrimination Commission. Then she met that doctor in 2004, published the books 2010, and launched a website and endowment fund in 2012. And this book is dedicated to all children in search of identity. And it's a sober reminder of the wounds inflicted by war and displacement. It tells a story and explains that what happened is that the parents knew that that child was disabled. They didn't know exactly what she had. She was a twin. So the time the other twin started crawling and then walking, Regina could not walk. So they thought that there was something wrong, but they didn't know what it was. And then there was chaos in the street, people were on the roads, displacement, and so on. So they decided to tell the older brother that was 2-3 years more than her to take her to the Red Cross so that they would take care of her. And it's how she got evacuated to Gabon in October 1968. But then on arrival, they were separated because on arrival, there were three groups of children, some unfortunately that had died during the trip or in the plane. So those bodies were taken aside for burial immediately, and nobody ever knew who they were, how many, this is a mystery. Then those that were quite bad, like her, were taken for further attention. Then those that were looking better, like the brother, were taken to another camp. So she got separated from the brother. At the end of the war in 70, most of them got their families traced. They got the missionaries got in contact with the families because the camp had to be evacuated in a hurry after the defeat. And so then those children were either sent back to family members in Nigeria or taken to orphanages in Nigeria. But because she was not well, she was taken to France. And some actually got adopted by Gabonese families too and lost their former identities. She remained unclaimed, and that was terrible. She describes in her book how she was just under a tree, seeing all the little children she knew from the camp, living with beaming faces, so happy, and she was feeling so rejected the second time, And then eventually, so she traveled to France. These are pictures from the camp, Sainte-Marie camp in Libreville. You see, she is in the middle on that second thing. And they were quite kind of happy in the camp, but so she was hastily flown to France, taken to Orthopedic Institute in Normandy, registered as a temporary ward of the state. Then she became supported by a French couple who became the foster parents, but they were living 300 plus kilometers away from Normandy. Then she spent her whole childhood and adolescence in a border in the institute, undergoing several surgical procedures destined to help her walk, but in vain. She was eventually reunited with her Nigerian family in 70. At that time, she was virtually 13. And it was a 2 weeks visit because people had learned that she had a family. So the French government said, oh, well, she has a family, she should go back. But the missionaries and foster parents told the government, you cannot do that. She's disabled, she's on wheelchair, there's no facility there, and she doesn't even know that family, she cannot speak the language. So eventually they said, okay. So she went on 2 weeks visit. She got involved later to voluntary work and launched, like I said, an association. Now she's a graduate with a master in human resources from Sciences Po, a very, very posh institute in Paris. And she lives and works with Total in the business district of Paris. From the time she spent in Libreville, she remembers very little. She wrote, my memories were only fragmented recollections. I was too young to understand my origin. Age 2, I knew I was evacuated from the country. I left Biafra like so many other kids, being crammed into military planes, taken off right in the middle of the bush under constant bombing, evacuated to the camp of Sainte-Marie in Gabon. I arrived in the camp as Mary, an unintentional identity error, because the files were not, it was difficult to gather files because of the bombing and the war. Malnutrition and bad flight conditions eliminated the weakest. Other children died when they were given the spoonful too much. The doctors in the refugee camp rapidly diagnosed the illness that was not noticed in war-torn Biafra. She was having polio, and she's not sure how she got it. Some people said that she was vaccinated 2 times instead of 1. Nobody knows exactly, but she cannot walk. The condition had been misunderstood and had done irreparable damage to me. An orphan and paralyzed, there was almost no hope that I would survive. So she had no remembrance of her family or surroundings, but she thinks now that, looking back, that might have helped her live a relatively quiet life as a young evacuee, surviving from one day to the next. But that same dearth of memories left her rootless and deeply worried about her future. Describing her early life, she wrote that it was built like a puzzle whose borders were those limited apart existence, Gabon and the camp. From her time in Libreville, she had very few memories, none of them on the war, except of those older children that were drawing pictures of home with planes, weapons, flags, soldiers, and Colonel Ojukwu. It will be 10 years before she meets her older brother again and hears from him his own fugitive memories of the war. That's when she went first to Nigeria. She met him because he went back in 1970. Aged barely 5 when the war broke out, Paulinus remembered planes in the sky, gunshots, plantations set on fire, with the village being people killed and others disappeared. In Gabon, she had relative happiness, but just at the time she started feeling good, adjusting, having some companions, she had a terrible pain of seeing, as she described, my little companions, those who were sought for, expected, found, living with their eyes shining with the price of being loved. Most children were reclaimed as soon as the war was over. And she said, I was alone once more, and for a long time, feeling abandoned, ignored, lost, trying to cope with all the unanswered questions. She spent days and nights speculating about her family's whereabouts. One thing is sure, she was saying, since the start of the search to reconnect with our families, I've never been officially reclaimed. She later explained that to cope with this overstretched imagination brought shreds of elusive memories, hints that she might have lived in another country with another family, adding that this hope that someone is expecting me overwhelms me from time to time. So the first pages of the book summarized our childhood, highlighting a deep-seated feeling of loneliness, an inability to fully express herself in French, that was a foreign language, an intense physical suffering at the end of orthopedic surgeons persuaded that operations would give her back her mobility, an uneasy relationship with her country of origin, and a desperate struggle to take root somewhere. And this is the first testimony published in French about this. She later confessed that the little girl that I was cried often in private, never in front of others. Too much suffering, too proud. And she lamented about that suffering again and always. And the pages of the book feature a litany of recurring words, pieces of a puzzle: war, orphans, pain, abandonment, fear, lost identity, anguish, survival. The questions about our past, present, and future. Who am I really? Where are my parents? Why was I being separated from my family? And why did my family never bothered about me after the war? What will happen to me? And the strain and uneasy relationship she developed with Nigeria is expressed in many recurring questions regarding home. She said, return home? Return where? Far away from France, to a country I no longer know, to a country that no longer exists, because it was also not just Nigeria, but she was from Biafra. And that's all she knew. And now it was like Nigeria being a foreign country also, closer to my parents' grave if they are dead, or closer to strangers if they are still alive. One of the memories she regained from meeting with a missionary nun in the camp, that was in the camp before, is closely linked with that. She said, above my bed in the camp, a simple sentence was printed on batik: we will die without shedding a tear. And that was a part of the national anthem for Biafra. And this was like a tribute to the people, my people. In Libreville, she remembered that in order to preserve the links with our families and our mother tongue, Father Pinos, that was the missionary in charge of the camp, had the idea to recruit teachers and nurses from our country. So they spoke and taught Igbo, sang to the children, told them folktales. Basic Igbo lessons were also on the program. And I had the privilege of meeting Father Pinus. He was still alive some years ago, and we visited him in the retirement home for the missionaries near Paris. And, Regina talked with him, and we gave a talk together to the old missionaries. She was really struggling to take root somewhere, and it made it difficult for her to choose between Nigeria and France. But she repeatedly called Nigeria home, you know. And when she met me the first time, it was funny, difficult to describe this, because she was an Igbo that had forgotten about Igbo land, and here I was a French that was, married in Igbo land, and it was like I was there to provide a lot of answers. She started devouring my books about Igbo land and Nigeria, and she said, oh, so she was asking me a lot of questions because she still wanted to understand, because the culture is so difficult to understand if you are not from there. These feelings were intertwined in her with a deep-rooted sense of the crucial role of family life and a visceral fear of abandonment. Yet in 1978, after nearly 10 years in the care of the foster parents, she would still be anxious about her future. So when she was hearing that she was going to visit Nigeria, she said to the foster parent, are you going to let me go there? How long? If I go there, will I ever come back? No one to take care of me anymore. She thought that they were going to dump her there, and this was terrible, and she really suffered it. Just the mention of the return to Nigeria was sending shivers down her spine. She said it means living all around me, the only bearings I know. Will I be abandoned again? What will happen to me? And then she described Catholic baptism, and she said, oh, the abandoned child that I am passes through the door of the huge Christian family. I might not be abandoned anymore. I now have two families, that of God and this French family. But actually, she didn't stay with the Catholic Church. She was deeply upset with the nuns that were in the orthopedic hospital. So she now is, an unbeliever. When the French government eventually learned about her Nigerian family, she was encouraged to return home. But she said, no, my country is here in France. How can I go? And the lines she writes on the wall, taken straight from her memory, only offer factual statements gleaned from adults around her. So our book, is not about Biafra war. It's not about the war at all. And it's very apolitical, just like the endowment fund. She is not interested in politics. All she wants is to learn more about Nigeria, and she has been there now several times. So her situation as a refugee led her to emphasize the suffering of the populations. When she talks about the war, she talks about these people that had no other choice than support the Biafran government. Those people that kept moving from refugee to refugee camp. Those that were trapped within some 1,000 square kilometers and suffering from starvation, dying, thirst, epidemics, And our life has been signposted by major decisions triggered by the war, dictated by her disability, and taken by people in charge of her, which slowly led her to the current situation. The first, the most painful, was obviously the one, taken by the parents when she was 2, to take her and her brother to the Red Cross. And probably it saved Regina's life, although the accidental loss of her file and subsequent separation from her brother made her a practical orphan. The second decision, taken by the camp's authority in 1970, to take her to France instead of Nigeria, had far-reaching consequences. It took her further away from her birthplace and family, and irreversibly altered her identity. It estranged her from her mother tongue, Igbo, and from her culture, and gave her a European language and culture instead. In fact, she's very, very Franco-French, if you see her in everything. It led her to choose French nationality, marry a French, embrace a French lifestyle, and impact a whole society for good. But she was struggling to fully interact with her Nigerian family. The parents had lost contact with her and the brother because of the war. So eventually they got back the brother, but they didn't know where the girl was. So she was left in limbo. She didn't know her name, her age, her family, and this really scarred her mind, It's something she repeats over and over in her book, that she didn't know who she was. And when she eventually got her name back, she was In fact, she was incensed. She said, how come that people don't even know my name, and why I didn't know my age? In the orthopedic center in France, every birthday was celebrated, and she was the one that had no birthday. So just imagine for a child, what it does. And when the foster parents decided to start making inquiries and contacted missionary agencies to know about her family, they didn't even tell her because they thought that if it doesn't work, it would be worse. But when she was informed, she was really annoyed. And, she was a preteen. She was just like 13, just 13. And so she burst into, anger. She said, what kind of thing is it? It was terrible. But eventually she accepted that she had a new name, Regina. Mary, that was the one they called before, that was the twins' name. Then she got her birthday, she got her parents and the whole family. And also, she was threatened by the French at that point because the French said, we don't need to pay for her anymore. But eventually they continued. So, it was decided that she would only meet her family during 2 weeks. So that first meeting and meeting the family in Nigeria was really an eye-opener for her. She was, it was very hard for her to live, and she was afraid. But eventually she left. And on arrival in Nigeria, her teenage mind was first overtaken by the new surroundings, the first discovery of the country, Lagos, Enugu, the rural Igbo land. Meeting her family for the first time, she struggled to absorb a huge amount of information on the country. People were talking to her every morning before she meets the family. They would try to tell her how to greet people, and this is the way we think we do in Igbo land. And she was very, very adverse to that. She didn't want to hear. She didn't understand anything. The climate was different. And then she could not understand the culture, why she should learn anything about it. And she was trying to find someone to blame. And initially she turned against her mother, who in her eyes bore the entire responsibility of the whole thing. She said, why did they leave her? And the problem was that mother kept crying and embracing her, and they could not communicate. Regina didn't understand the body language. She didn't know the language. It was like a stranger trying to grab her. It was terrible. And she said, yes, it's true. Once I was this mother's child, the child of this father, and that of ever extended family. Because she was used to small French families. All of a sudden, there were this crowd of people that were saying they were our family. And they wanted to take picture together. And she said, who are all these people? And she said she felt estranged to that culture and those around. That trip to Nigeria was nevertheless a positive experience for her because she discovered a lot and it was overwhelming. Then she met one of her half-brothers because the father, I think, had 5 wives. And for the very first time, she heard, here you are at last. We had lost hope. We often thought of you. And people were really welcoming her. And it was so much, So eventually, she said, my self-esteem got a boost. I realized that my presence was sufficient to touch all around me and make them happy. So it turned her head. She thought that she was a kind of little goddess, and that everybody wants her to see. And then she met her dad. She was introduced to her twin sister, and she had a problem, but at least she was very, very happy having met them. Then she heard the story of her birth, the parents, the story of the evacuation. She was explained the meaning of her Igbo family name. She was given clues to appreciate Igbo culture, very little though. But in the end, it was a turning point. She said, I now know my life story. I know that my parents had envisaged this rush department for Gabon from my good to ensure I would be careful. I know at last that my clan, my people never abandoned me. Yet I cannot forget that somewhere in the files in France, I remain a temporary orphan. And this causes me pain beyond words. On her return from Nigeria, she was welcomed back by the foster parents, and they said, wow, they could not recognize her. She had plaited hair. She was dressed with African dress. You know, they were so happy. And for her, it was a new beginning. And she said, now that I know who I am, I know my story, and I find ready to face the future. But then there were a lot of other struggles, torn between two cultures. A Nigerian visit to the hometown triggered the intervention of a Nigerian reverend father who seemed keen to offer her ways to reconnect with her culture. So she got invited for holidays in London with two families in 2 years. And at a point, she felt ready to envisage a possible return to Nigeria. She said, I wanted to return, meet my family again, know where my heart was really, to be able to decide whether to stay in France or go back. But I'd forgotten about my country's instability. So on December 31st, 1883, in Nigeria, there was a coup, as you know. So her visa was refused. And that led her to reassess her situation and the risk involved in a possible relocation. So she decided to take root in France. She applied for naturalization. And then she was, the parents gave her a precious bundle, a document, an envelope with all the documents, all the correspondence about her between the Red Cross missionaries, etc. And so she started reading all this, and it made, it was filling the holes in the puzzle. And she started feeling, yes, my life is complete. I know who I am. I know what happened to me. I'm proud of my brand new French ID card. I can show everybody and say, see who I am. I'm a person, I have an identity, a kind of new skin. But at that time, she had also problems with the Reverend Father, because actually the Nigerians were trying to reclaim her by organizing a kind of wedding, saying you must marry a Nigerian, you must marry an Igbo. So when she discovered that they had that plan, every time she went to London, the people were just trying to organize. They even brought a suitor at a point, when she was in her late teens. And she made the man very miserable and said, I'm not interested. So that was the end of those that tried, And in 2004, she was now a multiple degree holder. She was involved in associations, and she decided to make another trip to Nigeria. So she returned to complete the circle. She said, to ensure that I'd not taken the wrong decision when I chose to live in France and take the nationality, and also to reassure my family about my future in case. So it was a new landmark. She traveled and say, okay, now let's forget about the trip from 78. Now I'm a grown up, I'm an adult. And the book relates this visit with a lot of emotions. Our parents had grown older. Our mother, as beautiful as ever, was marked by these years of separation and suffering. Meeting our extended family again clearly touched Regina deeply, and watching their loving faces filled with admiration, with a happiness so great, filled her with happiness, and she was very happy. And she also mentioned the passing away of the diviner, the Dibia, the one with 4 eyes, whom our mother used to visit to inquire of her faraway daughter. And she said, the Dibia, I remember having come close to him, just like I talk to you today. It happened in my little girl's dreams. Those many evenings where I cried uncontrollably without anyone there to dry my tears. He kept close to me, accompanying me nearly everywhere. My Dibia, whatever his name, was very real in those moments. He said, don't worry, my child. The dead are all around you. They love you, even though you cannot see them. And, it was an encouragement to her. And eventually she kissed her mom. She made peace with her. She was so happy, And then years passed, and she met that man that is now the husband, Richard, a very white French guy that is so much in love with her. And Regina's character is not easy to take, because she went through so much, and it had toughened her. And when she meets people, she's not that kind of very gentle and polite person. She's not, she takes a lot on herself, and she's also asking the same from people. If she doesn't like something, she will say, this is not good, and that's it. But Richard loves her to bits. And so she wanted to introduce him to a Nigerian family. So she made a move to reconnect with her older brother, Namdi, that is now a medical doctor in England today. So they traveled to Britain. Regina explained to her brother that she came to present her husband, asked for the benediction to renew family ties, and Namdi blessed her on behalf of the clan. And then she married in France. She had a special thought for her parents over there in Africa. And that are the closing book words in the book. But she continued talking with the family. Sometimes if I'm around, she uses me as an interpret. So there's one of the half brothers that she talks a lot to, and she's quite close to him. So they talk on the phone. And unfortunately, the parent passed away in 2014 and 15. She couldn't go for the burial, but she kept in touch. And eventually she traveled some 2-3 years ago now. She went to see their graves, and reconnect with the family. But it has been difficult. So in reminiscing on life's lessons, it's nearly finished, you know what I'm saying. Very little by little, she said, I wanted to live, to fight, to understand where I came from, to know my origin better, to rebuild my life. In the course of my identity quest, meeting, talking to people who fostered and cared for me, helpless as I was, I eventually found the answers that I was seeking. And I thought that the best thing that happened for me after the suffering of the war, that was that. As a refugee in France, I'm given a host family. I've been an orphan since 13, but now I discovered my identity and I'm happy, And you look at her now, she's highly successful, not only with her work, but with all she does. She's very passionate about NGOs and humanitarian work. She talks a lot. She's invited to talk by different sets of people. She's talked on French TV about our experience, because she's a kind of unique person on the scene there. And she's very, very passionate, and she's trying to share. And at the same time, she continues learning about Igbo land, about Igbo culture. She's learning English so that she can communicate more. And she has one of her colleagues, in fact, several colleagues are Nigerian. They are working with Total. And one is a Yoruba, another one a Hausa. And she visits them from time to time, talks with them at work. And this summer, she's going to Nigeria again, to the north, to meet with the Hausa one, and then probably other places. But so it's very important. And like I was discussing earlier, there are several other projects that have been launched apart from the story of Regina. The Echezona project from the US seeks to identify and reunite children who were not returned to their kith and kin in southeastern Nigeria. And this is their website. But I've been communicating with them sparingly, but I get the impression that they were not very successful in finding out, some former abandoned children or troubled children. I don't know. But apart from that, it's interesting that many books have been published about memories of childhood. The first one, War Stories, is written by an American that was in Biafra just before the independence. And he's talking about the children. This Surviving in Biafra, the Story of the War, by Ugochukwu. Yeah, the story of the Nigerian Civil War. And then another one is Biafra, Lest We Forget, by Adewusi. That's whose father was Yoruba and the mother Igbo. Another one is Still in the Shadow of Death by Echeta, about his childhood. Another one, Dear God, Never Again, Memoirs of a different child soldier, somebody that was taken by force, conscripted during the war. And then Last Train to Biafra, Memories of a Biafran Child. And this, the war is not only it has not only impacted those that lived through it, but other people like Ruth Onwura, that I know is one of my friends, and she's she has the same age with our own children, and she's in the UK. The mother the mother was British, and she married to a Igbo man, and the father unfortunately died some years ago, but she's a medical doctor, and she decided to write that little book, Let My People Go, to talk about the war that she never lived, but that she heard from her parents and possibly grandparents' father's side. So in conclusion, the legacy of the war continues to impact the lives of veterans who experience delayed effects of PTSD symptoms. And all these that I talked about remain relevant, not only because they document a people's struggle for survival, not only because the conflict was the first to receive audiovisual coverage, but also because the humanitarian catastrophe on the ground is reflected in the plight of refugees fleeing similar crises today in Syria, Middle East, and elsewhere. So may we learn from the victims' plight. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Ugochukwu. I told my friends that this will be an unforgettable conversation, and that is what it takes. I mean, looking at the comments on the chat axis, and people are actually marveling at the depth of the story and at how broadly the Nigeria-Biafra war impacted lives. You know, I don't think, like you rightly say, it's not only those who lived through it. Even generations after us are still feeling the impact of the war. Nigeria has not recovered from the war. That's the sad thing. Nigeria has not recovered from the war, and as a nation, we're not doing much to actually heal from the war. We are even doing more in the angle of deepening the crisis, deepening the trauma of the war. And that makes it all the more difficult for people who lived through the war to recover from the trauma of the war. You know, I am barely 2 years younger than Regina. I was too young to understand what was happening. But I noticed that around the time I was 11, 12, I used to have nightmares of the war. And I would just jump up from sleep and I will share my story, and they will say, it's what happened in the war. Yet I'd have no recollection of the war because I was born like 3 months before it started. I mean, that was too young to know anything. But how it got registered in my psyche, I can tell. How a decade after I was having nightmares on a war I don't recall seeing, I can tell. So if it happened to me, what of Regina, who was 2 years old? I mean, she will have a baggage.
Yeah.
And you have just told us about her baggage. So we do have quite a lot to say. It is very, very clear, like you said at the beginning, the man who has continued to depend on drugs to survive. I mean, it's so painful, it's so pitiful. He is even fortunate to be in the United Kingdom, where the health facilities are in such a state to help him. What of those in Nigeria who have no medical facility to turn to, no public psychologist to visit? You know, all those things that are available out there, we don't have here. So we kind of continue to recycle the trauma within us. I kind of think that when we look at the way we relate, among ourselves in the country, it's actually a fallout of the Civil War. The aggression, the unprovoked anxieties and unprovoked harassment, we meet out one to the other. We are kind of a bunch of angry people and so on and so forth. I think these are all carryovers from the war. The fact that we have not dealt with the trauma of the war. We have not come to terms. The ghost of the war is still strongly dogging our footsteps. You know, thank you so much for bringing it out for us again, helping us to appreciate this category of persons who had a different kind of story. I mean, the displacement, I don't know, but it's kind of, to me, it feels like a much deeper wound than those of us that actually lived through the war, survived it within Nigeria. While I expect that those that are participating will send us their questions in the chat platform, there is a question already on ground, Prof, and we may start giving us an answer to it as I look up other questions. The speaker is asking, how do aspirations affect people's existential reality? You know, that's when you were talking about Regina, her name, what she thought about home, which home, and stuff like so. How do our aspirations affect our existential reality? I don't know what you have to tell us about that. You have related. Go ahead.
You know, I've talked a bit about that. The fact that, you know, even apart from our book, discussing with her so many times, you know, you find out that all she wanted was to belong. She had that was so paramount in her life. She really wanted to belong. She hated being just outside everything. Even in the camp, you know, it took her time to grow, and from 2 to 5 in the camp, at least she had companions, she was having playmates. And then these people also all of a sudden disappeared, you know, reclaimed by their families. And then she was alone again. Then she went to France, and that was even worse, because now she had not only the surroundings were completely different, the climate, the language, everything. And she wanted to belong, and there was nobody, because even the foster family that was very loving, you know, were so far away. And all kinds of things were happening. They sent her little dresses, you know, through the staff, and the staff never gave it to her. They were giving that to other children, because there was a hints of racism there. So she was really struggling, and she wanted to belong somewhere, and she didn't know how to cope with that. And then you can see that after that, when the Igbo people in France, in England, started being interested in her, she thought that it was genuine. So she was jumping for it, you know. And then she found out that no, that all they wanted was to grab her back and marry her. And she was so upset and annoyed, and she became very, very, I think she really insulted the suitor that came, you know, through these people, and said she didn't want to go there again. So it was another door that closed. She was very, very suspicious of everybody. And she continued really making effort. I think that the result was also that she really studied. When she started studying, she was struggling in school because she didn't have the grasp of the language. But when she saw that that was the only way, she really studied hard, you know. And she's still studying. She's doing a course now in coaching, because she wants, when she retires, she's planning to become a coach, a life coach. So she's studying seriously. Then she studies English. Sometimes she sends me words to see whether the translation is good or not, you know. So she's really determined and focused, because she wants to prove people that she's not the person they think, you know. And she has been pursuing better situations in her place of work. She doesn't take no for an answer. You know, that's the immediate result of all this. And now she's quite happy, of course, in her marriage. They don't have children, you know, but there you go. At least she has a loving husband, and she's very recognized in her work. And so I think that's how she tries to get from aspirations to reality.
Thank you, Prof. Somebody put up something, actually feeling for Regina's mom. And he's saying that the mom would have suffered as well. I think so too, but I don't know what your thoughts are. You know, kind of technically losing her daughter. And even when she had the privilege of being reconnected with this daughter, that connection was so ephemeral. The daughter didn't really accept her for so many years. Even not coming home to Nigeria would have added to her, well, I say, sense of loss too, until she died. And then somebody is saying, this is interesting. This must be, okay, he said, how can Biafra be denied both to exit? Sorry, how can Biafra be denied both exit and entry? Now, we don't know what this means. But that's what somebody put in here. Anyway, Uyi Lawani has his or her hand up. So I will ask him or her to unmute and ask her question. Sorry if you are not a her.
All right. It doesn't matter. I'll take any of the pronouns.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Ugochukwu. And thank you also, Professor Uchembi, for moderating. Your conversation with us today is so profound, Prof, that it would be minimizing the impact of what you've done to ask just any kind of question. I want you to know that you brought a reality to us that we so often want to relegate in our minds. And there is nothing that that brings it home more than that you can actually put a name, a face, a human to what is the story of thousands, if not millions of people across the world. I served in the army in Nigeria. I have to say, I participated in missions in Liberia and Sierra Leone during their wars there. I had traveled to the refugee camp in Ijebu. I went there many years ago. I read Ishmael Bear's book, Long Way Gone, Memoirs of a Child Soldier. So, but all of that still pales into insignificance compared to the story, the impact and the profoundness of this story you brought to us. So I just want to thank you. I want to ask that you continue to encourage her. And I want to also mention to Philip and the organizers of this, I'll be ready, I'll be willing, if it has to have to be a cost of paying for translation, if we can get Regina herself to come and speak. Matter of fact, I'd recommend that we put something like a team together to make it as big and as impactful an occasion as possible. So please, you have my deep, deep, deep gratitude for bringing this story to us today. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I was telling before we started the talk that Regina wanted our book to be translated into English so that people could read it, especially in Nigeria. But so far, we have not found any publisher willing to pay for the translation because I volunteered to translate, but obviously it has to be paid for. So it was just like that. So if people have an idea how we can get that book translated and published, that would be really she would be very happy. She contacted our publisher in France, but the man had no clue to how it is done. Yeah. Okay.
Okay, thank you, General Uyi. Permit me to use that title for you. We'll get in touch with you on your proposal, and thank you for serving our nation and serving our Africa as a soldier. We appreciate you immensely. Francis, you've had your hand up. Please, can you unmute and let's hear from you. Thank you.
Yes, my question was not well expressed because it's text. So I want to ask the question myself. The whole question of secession was exit. Biafra wanted to exit, and Nigeria said it's not proper. And now Biafra is supposed to be inside, and throughout the whole process of the election, Biafra wants to stay, but Nigeria is not ready. So how do you so that someone cannot exit and someone cannot enter still. Are you getting
Okay.
the question?
Yeah, but before I hand over to Prof, please, can everyone mute so that the background noise will be minimized? Please mute your mics so that the background noise will be minimized. Prof, please respond to.
I don't feel like answering political questions really. Obviously, I studied the war. I've published 2 or 3 books on it, but you know, this is a very sensitive question, and frankly, I don't want to talk about it. And I would say, looking back at Regina's point of view, that what is interesting is, though she was born during the war, just before the war, suffered through all this that I discussed, you know, she has no political point of viewpoint. And in fact, she goes beyond that, because she has colleagues that are Yoruba, but one particular one that is a Hausa, and she has been talking about it. And she said when she goes to Nigeria in July, that she's going to stay with the husband. She's staying with him. And one day I was asking her how she feels about all this, you know, the question of ethnical group and so on. She was not interested really. She said she doesn't care about politics, and about, you know, another question I was asking her was, for me, was even more than political. It was a question of Muslim versus you know, others. And she said that for her, she's considering the man as very reliable, very, you know, she gives him all the hands up and the thumbs up. And she said that she has no problem with whether he's Hausa or not Hausa, or Muslim or not. In fact, she is a practicing Muslim. So I think that, you know, there are things. It's like, I give you an example. I'm with the Open University. Now I'm just full-time research, but before I was lecturing. And one day there was a delegation from Nigeria, and I was in the Institute of Education in languages. And so, because I heard that they were coming, I said, okay, let me go and greet them. And everybody had a badge. So these people came, obviously being Nigeria, you know, I know the names. So I saw that they were all Hausa, and they looked at my badge and said, and one said, Ugochukwu. And he just turned and went. So there was, the dialogue was not really started, and it was over, you know, just because I called myself Ugochukwu. So I thought it was painful, and I believe that, you know, there is a way people can, yes, we know Nigeria started the bad way, because it didn't agglomerate as people like, for example, countries like France had 1,000 years of history to become the France we know. They were not like that before. They were enemies. They were little kingdoms, but they had their time. You know, it happened gradually. Nigeria was created out of just the whims of colonizers, and it's unfortunate. But at the same time, there we are, you know, unless we want to all separate, like people are saying, oh, the Yorubas want to go that way. You know, the Igbos, I think that, like they say, you know, they don't want the war anymore, because everybody suffered. And the worst part of it is that here in the UK and other places, people deny it. They said, oh, no, it was not it was just a small thing. You know, I've heard people launching books in the UK, you know, British, that were saying that just a little number of people died. It was not like that. So obviously, you find that, I believe that those people that are living in Nigeria, whether they belong to one group or the other, you know, there are many groups in Nigeria. It's up to them to decide what they want to do. But what I dislike personally is when the diaspora, especially those in the States, you know, start creating their own agenda over and above, at least that's my own feeling, over and above what's going on in the country. Because if they cause commotion, it's those in Nigeria that will suffer, not those that are in New York or Washington. So it's very important that Nigeria can, I don't know how, but can decide about its future. I knew someone that was very, very dear to me, Professor Omuni, that unfortunately died very young here. We were in constant contact. It was like a brother. And he used to talk about the possibility of a kind of thing like the States, where there will be far more autonomy of the different parts of Nigeria, where people can decide to a greater extent about their life, their future. And he was dreaming of that and was saying that, oh, there are so many people that are agreeing with me. Let's hope it will, it will happen. Well, he died and it has not happened yet, but that's all I can say. I don't want to really talk about politics, and because there's so much rotten stuff in what I read. I'm attached to several WhatsApp groups of Christian academics from Nigeria, from Nollywood people, and of all kinds, especially in the academics. And every day, I see so many entries in those for Facebook that, just look at that and say, only God will save that country. So that's my conclusion.
Thank you, Prof. Indeed, only God will save us. But then you are bringing up something important, and the person that asked that question, Frank, is also bringing up something important. We cannot close ourselves to this kind of retrospection. For Nigeria to move forward, Nigeria must face her past. Nigerians must come together and recognize that the war happened and that we are all victims of that crisis. We all played into it. We are the protagonists, and we are also the ones carrying the scars of the war. Wherever anyone belonged in the side of in the divide, we all played a part in the Nigeria that happened to us from 1966 until today. So we need to start talking, and I'm happy that you are making us to talk. The story of Regina is a challenge.
Il y a un problème de connexion.
Yeah, I think we lost her for a bit.
She's
Okay.
back.
Yeah. So
let me say something. What I've found out from my own experience, and then in asking people, we have 4 children. We had 4 remaining, and all of them married differently. And there's one that is married to a guy that is Yoruba. And he spent part of his childhood in Nigeria, then became a UK person. And one day I was chatting with our daughter. We were all together there with my husband, and then we started talking about Biafra. And that young guy that was born, I don't know, like in 1980, said, "What is Biafra?" So we said, you have never heard? He said, no. And then I cannot describe how I felt. And I said, that's terrible. And I started looking into it. And I found out that, after the war, in fact, it started 69, apparently, from my research. 69, they started quenching history. I connected with you, Professor Uchendu. I was asking you about these things. And I found out that they had not been teaching history properly, so that people will not even know what was going on. Then at that point, about that time, I was asking myself all these questions. I was contacted by the National Library in France, that I'm a member of their childhood stories, and they asked me to write an article for their magazine about the teaching of history in Nigeria. So I wrote that, and then I contacted publishers in Nigeria that publish for schools and asked them to send me their books on history. And actually they did. But you see, it's a new collection. So I've not started studying it. But I think that if we want to go further and forward, like you said yourself, the first thing is to tell the truth about history. Study our history without saying we don't want to know. You compare that with France. They had a lot of problems during the Second World War because part of France was supporting the German. As you know, they were overwhelmed and in fact colonized by the German for nearly 4 years. So there were people in, for and against. But these things are still discussed widely. For people publish, there is no shame, well, whatever side they were, it's better to know. But if you hide things, pretending that everything will be well, it will not be well. And I commend the National Youth Service because, it is good to do that. But at the same time, it's not sufficient. Like this man that just saw my name and said, oh, Ugochukwu, and turned, he was far younger, so of course, he had not lived the war, but he knew that his people were fighting the Igbos. So it's not good to hide. We need to study history. We need to, now that apparently the government in Abuja decided to really, develop history lessons at all levels, well, let it be. Yeah. Hello?
Yes.
Yeah, we
thank
can hear
you
you,
so much.
Prof.
I think I have to hand over to Philip now. We have barely 5 minutes to finish up. Philip has something to say about a citizenship conference coming up shortly. So Philip, as you wrap up, please address those issues. And a few other comments on the chat box. Some people can look at the chat box for some comments there.
Yeah, I hope my permit me. I've been struggling in and out for a while, but it's very interesting for me. Also, I'm also a bit traumatized that I had a chance to go to some school, but I couldn't afford it. So, but I'm happy to. I mean, that's just on a lighter note. But it's interesting to learn that somebody who is differently able, as Regina, is able to be influential, even in France. Look at the different initiatives that were introduced to us at the beginning. While if she had been within the Nigerian context, perhaps we don't know what may have become of her. And this also touched to the question of governance. And this is my own take on the issue of elections and our own emphasis on money, electing people in power and stuff like that. And now the noise of the noise as of pedal the built, and are not hearing much, from people who were so vibrant during the electoral process. So we were so excited during elections. When it comes to the aspect of governance that really affects our life, we just take the back seat and become commentators, and we don't even take any significant action. I was just reading from the chat, a naming culture, which is supposed to be like a memory initiative for somebody who, in the eyes of history, according to certain perspectives, is supposed to be a villain. But these are people that we, hype within our own context. We name them because what our moral value system is ultimately determined by the kind of influence, power, or wealth that you are able to project. And I thank you, Professor Ugochukwu, because this is something that's very important that you've brought to our attention today, to say that, well, there might be some very difficult stories of Biafra, but it's not all negative. And this is one thing I think we should learn from this. This is a lady who faced challenges in an era where gender would have been a very restricted issue, but she's been able to make do with her life, something very positive, and we can talk about her story today. And we desire to listen to her, to work with her, to even help her even achieve more. Not only being a female, but also having some physical, challenges. And this is supposed to speak to us. There are a lot of pains that we go through in life. There are a lot of challenges that we go through in life. But how do we create positive narratives out of these challenges? I think this is what we also have to learn, from Regina Ubanatu's I learned the pronunciation, but anyway, please pardon me. So yeah, and also on the question of citizenship, I know Prof. Chendo is supposed to be the one to actually tell us about this conference, but I was happy to read that our own organization is organizing a conference, I think early next year, on citizenship, and it cannot come at a better time where Nigeria as a nation is struggling, to understand the context of citizenship. There is I focus basically on learning, studying ethnicity and the kind of dynamics, especially in the North Central, where this is like a thing. And my own idea is that the way we perceive our questions of identity across different regions in the country is different. Some put religion before ethnicity, some put ethnicity before religion, and so it becomes difficult to, create a nation out of these different divergences that we have. And Professor would the place of it to start looking for how to make our lives better. No matter where you stand at the on the side of the divide, it's important that you know that our destiny has been tied at some point, at least for now. And so we need to, make the best of it, the way we can, irrespective of how we have been affected. So without further ado, let me thank Professor Ugochukwu for taking out time. She says she's retired, but she's not tired, still an active researcher. We thank you for always being at our programs, and also sharing this wealth of experience with us. I think we should not tell Professor Uche because she's part of this our space. She's always been here. Whenever we call on her, she's here. She's family. She's always been supportive and helping us to grow. We thank Professor Uche. We also thank for what they are doing. I'm particularly interested in the aspect of religion that you have been teaching out in the East, which I think is important. It's also important to know that religion need not just be something negative. If we can identify with it based on individual experiences, then we need to know how these things play out across different contexts. So to be some people, some in the East might be surprised that Enugu got some votes. But when you realize that there are some Muslims in the East, who may even, out of some empathy, voted for him, that there could be some possibility of that. So we need some of these understandings and not just creating binaries, divisions of where people are from, what they are affiliated to, in order to move forward. So I think we should wrap up. I'm sorry for taking much of your time. We thank Christians or Catholics that joined us. I know today is not a very good day, only Thursday, but priests are actually here on the platform from the community. We see all of you. We thank you for taking our time to join us. We thank every person that has listened to us. We thank the General, Professor Uyilawani, who has also told us to take this forward and initiate more conversation and at least even make something better out of our presentation today. This is why we hold some of these lectures. We promise to follow up together with Professor Chendo and Professor Ugochukwu and see how best we can make this work. It's important that the story is translated, the book is translated in English, because it actually touches on the life of audiences that are English speaking. Even though it pains me to say that, but that's the reality at the moment. We should also have an Igbo version anyway, to bring it home. So I hope we're able to work on this and chart the way forward and get people to drop their funds, to help us support this process. So without further ado, we would like to thank everyone and wish us the very best. Happy Easter to those celebrating. Ramadan Mubarak for those who are fasting, and whatever you're celebrating in your own little spaces, we also wish you the best. And see you very soon during our next event. We shall be communicating. All right, everyone. Bye.
Thank you. Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
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 Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everybody. Bye. Bye.
Bye.